Hey folks, Nathan P. Butler here. Welcome to Nate's Favorite Deck Building Games, and this time we take a look at a game that I've actually done some content overviews for previously, which is Star Wars The Deck Building Game. I'm trying to get away from doing detailed content overviews for a lot of different games because it just takes a lot of time, it's very tedious, and I'm not sure how useful those are relative to just regular views of a game. So hopefully going forward, primarily what you'll see for Star Wars The Deck Building Game here on the channel will be episodes of Nate's Favorite Deck Building Games, looking at them rather than detailed content overviews. But I have done them for these previous sets here. So let's take a look here at what we have. So the idea here is that this is, at least initially out of the box, meant to primarily be a two-player game. You have a core box based on the original trilogy, you have a core box based on the Clone Wars, known as the Clone Wars Edition, and then the Mandalorian Faction Pack. This does allow for 2v2 play using rules that you can find online. This also allows for that type of play, but in this case allows you to have different factions for every player. There's two factions in here, Rebels versus Imperials. In here it's Separatists versus Republic. The Mandalorian Faction Pack is a little bit different in that it only has one faction, that is, of course, the Mandalorians, but it also has the components necessary to play a three-player, free-for-all type of game mode. There are no official solo modes yet for this game, but if you look on Board Game Geek, there are plenty of different fan-made variants, the most popular being one called Leaders, and another really good one that's much simpler that I like called Jabba the Bot. Overall, the game plays somewhat similarly to Star Realms, but it has some twists on that formula here. So everybody does start out with a symmetrical starting deck. They all have different flavor to them in terms of the art and the actual names of the cards, but in essence, whether you're looking at the Mandalorians, the Empire, the Rebels, the Separatists, or the Republic, you're going to have 2 cards in your 10-card starter deck that are going to give you 2 attack power, 7 cards that are going to give you resources here, and then you have 1 card in your starter that's essentially like a wild card. When you play it, you can get one of either attack power, resources, or the Force. We'll see what that means here in just a moment. Attack power and resources are basically what you would see in pretty much any deck building game that involves direct combat. Attacking is an ability to go after others in some fashion, and then resources are what you're going to spend to buy stuff. Probably the most unusual thing that this game does when it comes to resources is simply that even though your resources build up during your turn and then go away at the end of your turn that they are not spent, they're actually represented by these little yellow cubes. So they're a little bit more beginner friendly because as you generate resources, you'll take these cubes, and then as you spend them, you put them back in the supply and put the rest of them back in the supply at the end of your turn to more easily keep track of what you have to spend. The starter cards are all marked at the bottom. Whoever starter, all the card backs are this, for anything that goes in your decks. The goal of the game is to defeat your opponent by taking out their various bases. So in that sense, it kind of interweaves the idea, say, from something like Star Realms, of there being a health for the other side that you're trying to whittle down, but also bases in play that do certain things that are ongoing. So each faction has a deck of 10 base cards here. So we have Mandalorian, Rebel, Imperial, Republic, Separatist. There's always one that says start the game with this base in play. It's always the one you start the game with, obviously. And it has a value underneath at the bottom that tells you essentially how much damage that base can take before it is destroyed. You start the game with one in play, the one that it tells you, and then at the beginning of your turn, if one was taken out since the beginning of your last turn, now you're able to pull another one out, and it's not random. You pull one out of the ones that you have available to you. At the start of a standard game, at least when you're starting to play, it suggests just using 5 specific ones as your potential library, but there are variants that change how many you are able to use. The goal of the game, again, in kind of the standard starting mode, is to defeat your enemy by taking out 3 of their bases, and they all have varying abilities beyond the first one, and they all have different health values, essentially. So not every side is going to always have the exact same amount of health, depending on which bases they choose, but typically the ones that have lower health might have stronger abilities, The abilities do vary quite a bit. Some of them trigger upon revealing a base, some of them trigger the entire time it's active. It just depends on which one we're looking at here. Again, there are other variations, like ones that allow more flexibility with bases or more bases to be used, in which case you might aim it for 4 instead of 3 being destroyed as the game ending condition. But typically, base game, following the base rules, it is 3. Examples of these abilities: notice Fort Anaxes here on Anaxes. When you reveal it, purchase a Republic or neutral card from the Galaxy Row for free and add it to your hand. So that's immediately when it's revealed. Or you got Camino. When you play a trooper for the first time each turn, add a trooper from your discard pile to your hand, and so on here. So you notice there a reveal ability when you first put it into play, or an ongoing ability, and so on. And for what it's worth, since these are never in your main deck, they're just in your stack of bases that you can pull from. They do all have the faction symbols on the back to differentiate them. Now, as I mentioned, this game effectively has 3 different sort of currencies or numbers that you are tracking, stats that you are tracking throughout your turns. You have an attack value, you have a resources value, and you have a force value, which is one of the unique mechanisms for the game. So you have this little white cube here, and it's going to start on either the Rebel or Republic side, but essentially it'll move up and down these tracks throughout the game. Anytime you gain a force, it moves towards your side. And the Mandalorian faction, because it is something that enables that 3-player game, has a little half-size card here that you can kind of stick here so it can move like so, or you can cover up whichever side it goes to, or you could just flip them over and just use the neutral kind of side with no faction symbols. The original one doesn't have that. It just has Rebel and Imperial on both sides. But essentially, when it's in the center, nothing happens. When it's on your side, even if it's only by 1, the force is with you, and certain cards trigger off of the force being with you to give you usually some kind of extra benefit. And if it's all the way on your side, then at the start of your turn, you get 1 extra resource. It's essentially a tug of war throughout the game. As for what types of cards you can purchase and put into your deck, well, we do have some always available cards, which is typical for a deck building game, in both sets, whether it is the original set for the original trilogy or the Clone Wars edition. They're called Outer Rim Pilot, cost of 2 resources, but gets you 2 resources when played, and has the ability exile this unit, which means essentially to remove it from the game. But as soon as you get into the Clone Wars version, there's actually an exile pile you'll have for yourself, because some things will actually interact with the exile pile, but usually they're gone from the game. But exile this unit to gain 1 force. And then some flavor text, and it does say Outer Rim Pilot deck at the bottom. Anytime you're playing, even if you're mixing up factions, you'll just use one of these decks, but again, they're effectively identical. Talk a little bit more about card types here. We have unit cards, which are vertical. Could be a vehicle-looking thing, could be an actual character, but they're all considered units. Some of them have the little symbol noting that they are unique. But again, cost up here. What you get out of it is here. Keywords, if there are any, plus any abilities here. Faction symbol there. So in this case, Mace Windu, you get purchased for 8. It goes in your discard pile. When your discard gets reshuffled, it becomes part of your deck. When you play it, the 8 means nothing, but you get whatever's up here and whatever the ability might be. In this case, 6 attack and 2 force, or in the case of Padme Amidala here, it'd be 3 attack and 2 resources. One interesting thing about the way these cards play is when you put them out there, you do get the resources if it's like force or the resources themselves. The attack value doesn't just add to a pool. You have to actually commit units to an attack to apply their attack value. So you put it out there, you now have access to the 6 or the 3 for attack. You've gotten your 2 force, you've gotten your 2 resources. And then as far as the abilities on the card, those don't come into play immediately upon playing it unless it says so. Typically, you put it out onto the table, and to activate the ability, you must exhaust it. You must tap it, essentially, to indicate that the ability is being used. So you have a little bit more strategy as to when cards go out versus when they actually activate versus what they attack, as we'll see here in just a moment. On the bottom of the cards for units, you'll see this upside down text. One thing we're going to see with the Galaxy row, as the main row is called here, is that you can only purchase cards that are of your faction or neutral. You cannot purchase cards from any other faction. But how do you get them out of the row and get some benefit from them? Well, you can do this. You can spend this much attack to go after them, to defeat them, and get whatever this reward is. If you're playing as the Rebels or as the Republic, it's referred to as sabotaging. If you're playing as any of the other three factions, it's referred to as bounty hunting. Just distinction without a difference, right? It's just different flavor names for attacking this value to get this thing to remove it from the galaxy row. There is also a variant where with neutral cards, which don't have that type of thing, you could spend credits equal to their cost to basically remove them from the row just to kind of clear things out so it's not clogging up the row. That is one thing in this game that can be very frustrating, which is that you could have a galaxy row filled with cards of the other faction, which basically stops you from being able to purchase very much except those outer rim pilots. So you'll want to go out and sabotage or bounty hunt or maybe pay off some neutral cards, as it's called, just to get those out of the way so you can keep building your own deck. You can also have capital ships. These are kind of like your ongoing cards, kind of like bases in Star Realms. When they get played, they stay out there for you. They generate resources typically each turn. They might have something like attack as well, but they generate resources each turn early on in the turn, and then they can be taken out by the other player using attack, and these have to be destroyed before the base can be damaged at all. So in essence, they're all like, outposts in Star Realms. They're ongoing, but they have to be taken out before you can target what you're trying to take out to win the game. The capital ships are always horizontal here. They'll usually have an ability symbol for the faction, if it is a faction at all, cost, and so on. You cannot sabotage or bounty hunt capital ships. So given the fact that you can only buy from your faction or neutral and can only sabotage or bounty hunt the other side, it's important to have balance within that main deck, which in this case is called the Galaxy deck for the game. You'll have a Galaxy row of 6 cards. I'll show you an example of what that might look like here in just a moment. But in order to make that a balanced game, essentially every time you play, at least in the standard modes of the game, you're basically going to have 30 cards from each of the two factions that are playing, so Mandalorian, Rebel, Imperial, Republic, or Separatists, 30 cards from each faction. So if it's a Mandalorian versus Rebel game, it's these two stacks, plus a set of neutral cards either from the original game or the Clone Wars edition. Those are also stacks of 30. Notice with neutral, there's no faction symbol. You can't bounty hunt or sabotage. There's none of that on the bottom. They're just buy it, play it, and so on. There's also a set of extra neutral cards, though, along with some neutral bases, and a card that's always out there called a permanent card, specifically from the Mandalorian Faction expansion, just for the 3-player free-for-all. I went into that and how that works in the content overview video for the Mandalorian Faction Pack. But basically, you're going to take 2 of these, 1 of these, and that's your Galaxy row. If you're playing with 3 players, you'll need to deal with another one of these, plus some extra stuff over there. So just as an example here, this is what your Galaxy row might look like. Say your Galaxy deck is kind of off to the side over here. So all of the cards, if I'm the Rebel player over here, Imperial player over here, all the Rebel cards are oriented towards the Rebel player. The Imperial cards are oriented toward the Imperial player, and that also means that any sabotage or bounty hunt abilities are facing the appropriate player. And then anything that's neutral isn't oriented toward either player. It's kind of in a neutral position. So like the units might be horizontal, so they're not facing one player or the other. The capital ships might be oriented like this, so they're not facing one player or the other. Then as you purchase, they're removed from the row. A new card immediately replaces it. Nothing really fancy here, except of course the fact that we have the orientation and the fact that you can only buy neutral or yours. So if I'm the Rebel player, I can buy Jyn Erso, Bossk, Mon Calamari Cruiser, or Blockade Runner. I cannot buy the Star Destroyer or do anything with it. I also cannot buy the TIE Interceptor, but I could sabotage it for 3 to get the reward. So again, the other kind of unusual thing with the game is the way that you handle attacking and triggering of your abilities. Again, you trigger your abilities once they're on the table and you just tilt the card to activate them. They don't necessarily immediately happen as soon as you play that card. And your goal, again, is to take out the bases, but you have to go through capital ships in order to do that. So let's flip this over and just kind of think through a turn. So at the beginning of your turn, if you don't have a base in play because it was already taken out, then you'll get to flip over your base and put it into play. Okay, so say that was the beginning of the Empire's turn. They just pulled their base out. So you can't ever destroy more than 1 base per turn because they won't have one available for you to attack if you take one out. Then if the force is all the way over on your side, you take that one extra resource I mentioned earlier, and if there are any resources on your capital ships, you would be able to get that. I just happen to have capital ships out here right now that don't have the resource symbol. They're only there for attacking. And then during your turn, you can play cards. You can activate card abilities, again, by tilting them and getting whatever it says. That is independent of them attacking. You can purchase a card from the Galaxy Row, like the Empire could purchase this TIE Interceptor. We're going to say that's the one card here from the Galaxy Row, just to kind of represent it over here. They could purchase that and put it in their discard pile. Or you can commit to an attack and resolve an attack, which are two separate things. So, to commit to an attack, you're basically going to choose which cards are going to be attacking and what their target is. Just to reorient Jin here to make it a little bit easier to see, one key distinction is that capital ships can only attack other capital ships or the enemy base. They're actually trying to go after the base when they're going after the capital ships. Whereas a unit could go after either the capital ship or base on the enemy side, or go after the cards in the Galaxy Row with sabotaging or bounty hunting. You cannot use a capital ship to sabotage or bounty hunt in the Galaxy Row. So the way that you would commit to an attack is you'll take one of your cards and kind of sit it somewhere relative to where you're going to attack. So Jin here, for example, she has an attack value of 4. She's going to commit to attacking the Star Destroyer. Let's say the Star Destroyer already had some damage on it. In this game, you also track your damage with little purple cubes. So we'll say that Star Destroyer already has 3 damage on it. So I've committed Jin to the attack. I could also commit the Mon Calamari Cruiser to that attack, but what good would it do? Because the Star Destroyer has only 4 health left out of its 7, because it has 3 damage on it, and Jin's going to deal those 4 damage necessary. So you got to kind of pick and choose. Then when you choose to resolve the attack, you actually deal that damage to the target. So in this case, she's dealing 4 damage. The Star Destroyer would be destroyed. Now the base is open to be attacked by, say, the Mon Calamari Cruiser, who could then commit to attacking the base. It is important to know, though, that if, let's say, it had 5 damage on it, so there's only 2 left to destroy it, and I committed Jin with her 4 attack to it, that extra attack doesn't bleed over to the base. I would just have 2 wasted attack out of her 4 going after the Star Destroyer. So you're going to have to be efficient to what you attack. So I just remove one of those cubes. Let's say the Star Destroyer had 4 damage, only 3 health left. Well, the most efficient use of my resources this time would be to commit the Mon Calamari Cruiser to go after the Star Destroyer, because that 3 is going to take it out, and then Jin could commit to going after the base to deal 4 damage. If I did it the other way around, then Jin has 1 wasted attack, and I'm only dealing 3 damage to the base. I also, if I wanted to, could go after the Star Destroyer and take it out, or maybe there's no Star Destroyer here, and I go after the base with the Mon Calamari Cruiser, or whatever. But maybe I feel as though I really want that extra 3 supply, because there's an important thing I want to buy, that 3 resources, excuse me. Well, maybe I could commit Jin instead to going after the TIE Interceptor, spend her 4 against that 3, to take out the TIE Interceptor from the Galaxy Row and replace it and gain that reward. I could not have done that with the Mon Calamari Cruiser, because again, the capital ships can only go after the bases and other capital ships. They cannot go after cards in the row. So yeah, Star Wars the Deck Building Game is a solid little deck building game. There's not a whole lot for it out there at this point. Again, just 2 core rulebooks that you can play individually or that you can combine, and then the Mandalorian Faction Pack that must be combined with something else. But some interesting twists on the genre here, right? The way that they handle committing to an attack, the delayed ability to activate abilities on cards you already have out there, the force track, the way the capital ships and bases interact, the limitations on what you're able to buy and add to your deck versus other ways to clear the row. And probably most importantly to me, the fact that it's sort of a mix and match kind of thing. I'm not used to deck building games where factions can get added in, mixed and matched, quite like this game. Most of the time, you're stuck with sort of a base set of cards, and there's extra little things you can add in, but it's more of the same to keep beefing things up, or it's new mechanisms rather than new factions. Like, you would never see Star Realms or Hero Realms take their 4 different faction colors and give you only a package with that faction color that mixes in exactly with everything else. They've done some things with mixed factions and whatnot, but the idea that you could remove an entire faction out of a Galaxy deck or out of your main deck and then add in a whole other faction separately to get a very different experience with another faction being able to be played by a player, that definitely changes things up. So kind of asymmetrical, kind of symmetrical, depending on whether you're talking about how things start versus how things go along the way. Definitely an interesting little deck building game. Again, straight out of the boxes, using rules found on the FFG website. You can play either one player versus another player, two players versus two other players, so two player or four player, but the four player mode is a team mode, or with the Mandalorian Faction Pack and any one base set, you can play a three-player free-for-all game. Toss in the solid solo modes that fans have made on Board Game Geek, and you have a game that effectively, unofficially plays at 1 to 4 players rather than 2 to 4. And we know there's more coming because at least one more faction pack is on the horizon that appears to be based on the rebels from the Phoenix Squadron or something to that effect from the era of Star Wars Rebels. I'll, of course, continue to cover the series here on Nate's Favorite Deck Building Games. As I mentioned, I probably won't do detailed content overviews now that I've done so for the Mandalorian Faction Pack.